Welcome to Envizion More. Here, we dig deep into the insights of first-generation wealth builders, unearthing stories of passion, resilience, and relentless vision. Your host is Wayne Wagner Jr., founder of Visionary Wealth Management. So sit back and dig in. It's time to envision more.
Hey, this is Wayne Wagner. Welcome back to the Envizion More Podcast. I am joined by a couple of regulars, or men who are becoming regulars today. Trent Booth, my regular co-host here, president of Veritas Leadership Group, and my brother Nate Wagner, who is president of the Actuator Leadership Group. And both these men are doing coaching and counseling for executives and ministry leaders and that kind of thing. But today we're going to dive into something really specific. I want to thank you guys for being here, but we're going to dive in. This is going to be speed round because Trent's got a hard stop in like 34 minutes. So he may just dump off if we're in the middle of something awesome. But which with the three of us here, it's usually something awesome. So anyway, thank you guys for being here. We're going to dive into redemptive conflict today. So I'll just throw that out on the table. Let's talk about redemptive conflict and go.
So, well, it's a good thing that anybody we're coaching doesn't deal with conflict. So it's really just not for everybody. But if you're dealing with conflict, this will be a good episode for you. What do you think, Nate?
Yeah, I was just going to say that when I start thinking about conflict, and obviously it's the inevitability, right? Like everybody's going to go through it. The problem is most people are either too prone to conflict because they just want to win. They want to get their point across. They want to take their power back, whatever that is, or they're prone to shy away from it and to avoid it and want nothing to do with it. And if we're honest, both of those, right, a hunger for conflict or an avoidance of conflict are both self-centered. It's me either avoiding the negative feelings that come from that or me looking at my own self-interest and wanting to get something out of it from the other person. And quite frankly, usually exploiting or doing something that's going to get something for me at the other person's expense. So I think about conflict. My first question is, are we dealing with competitive conflict or are we dealing with redemptive conflict? Because one clearly, even by the name of it, offers something far more beneficial than the alternative.
Yeah, and I think
let's define terms. What do you think, Wayne? Defining terms?
We're shooting this just shortly after the Olympics, right? So the Olympics just closed, I think, last week, and that's competitive conflict, right?
Absolutely.
A bunch of people, we're going to try to get the best speed or the highest jump or whatever it is, the fastest time, and that's competitive conflict, and that's where that's healthy, and trying to find out in the corporate world, we're trying to find win-wins, and win-wins is where everybody walks away feeling this is a great transaction. This is a win for me. And we also walk away knowing, hey, I didn't get quite everything I wanted out of that deal, right? But that's competitive conflict, and that's healthy and productive. I think that when we get to our interpersonal relationships, because then we go back to the office and we actually have to work with our team, right? Then we come home, our spouse has to put up with us.
Because in competitive conflict, Wayne, by definition, there are winners and losers, right? So if we've got this binary, you're either winning or losing, we want to avoid that in business. And I think this is where I guess we delineate the two. The challenge being, if we don't even know that redemptive conflict's a thing, we almost might treat every single conflict like there's going to be a winner and there's going to be a loser, where there could be win-win scenarios if we go deeper in intimacy, etc. How are we doing defining this so far, Nate? Are we close?
Yeah, and I love that you compared the Olympics to this, right? Because that's what it is. It's you're looking to impose your will to be able to get a win, to make something happen that I want to see happen. And the reality is, interpersonally on a team, in a relationship with my wife, with my kids, with my team in the business environment, when there's a winner, there's a loser. By definition, we all take a step back, right? Like there's a mutual loss when there's a winner and there's a loser. And so my take is that redemptive conflict is the goal of collaborating with other people in my sphere who I believe are operating in good faith with a mutual desire to work towards a best possible outcome. And so we're going to collaborate, which means I'm going to offer what I have, and I'm going to invite you to do the same. I think I would call redemptive conflict the belief that if I've got a 100-piece puzzle I never have all of the pieces. Other people in my sphere have other of the pieces. And if I'm going to put that puzzle together, two things are true. I don't have all the pieces and I don't have the cover for the box, which means we're all trying to figure out what the image is supposed to look like. And we're trying to invite other people in our sphere to bring their pieces to the table so we can collaboratively put the puzzle together and figure out what the image should be. But if I'm operating as though I have all of the pieces and I have the cover of the box, and it's my job just to impose that on other people and convince them that I'm right, that's competitive conflict. And that's going to bring about a frustration, disappointment, and it's never going to get the best out of any team.
Yeah, in a corporate setting, you're gonna not get the productivity. You're not going to get the desired outcome. It's going to lead to more turnover, which is very costly for the business in terms of time, effort, finances, training the next person that you hire in. And if you don't course correct, that person's going to leave too. So,
there's a silent killer there too, Wayne, in the sense that one might be just dominating and they're getting all the gold medals. They're decorated, but they're a disaster. Like they are not bringing people with them. They're winning, so they're climbing. But at the same time, if they can't build a team with them, they're just out in a walk here, So, in fact, even I have a question, Nate. So if somebody goes, all right, and maybe this is getting too much in the weeds too early here, but if we're saying there's a notion that compromise is us both losing. And it sounds to me like redemptive conflict kind of eschews that concept there. So
yeah, there's a lot of argument around it. Do we work towards a compromise so that both of us are giving something up and then we both feel like we've lost something? Or are we looking for that win-win solution where we're focusing and prioritizing on the thing that we're working together to accomplish, where we're getting the best out of both of us because of this collaboration? And I think the goal is that that's what we're working towards. But as Wayne identified, even me having to give up certain preferences or certain things in a process, I'm going to feel like I've lost something. But the question is, does the collective win make up for that? Right? Does what we're able to achieve together more than compensate for? So it's a net gain rather than a win-loss metric that we're trying to evaluate at that point.
Really cool. But if I hear you correctly, I hear you saying that we can't just necessarily use whatever it is that we're talking about right now. There's got to be a bigger picture.
Yes.
And we might both give up a little bit to get what we want to get, but the collaboration win and the fact that we're on the same side, what if that's better? I mean, but you're almost introducing different stakes, if you will.
Yeah, and I go even. I'm sorry.
I was going to jump in and say, in corporations, this is where mission and purpose statements and core values, right, give us a place to start from, a place to build from. Because if we're in the middle of something, we can ask some questions. How does this align with our mission statement? How does this align with our purpose as an organization? You may be evaluating how I'm showing up in a situation in terms of how am I representing the core values of the organization? And,
so what you're talking about is, again, that mutual trust, right? And so you start with, this is the paradigm that we have, which is, this is a shared mission and our common values, the mutual commitment to that mission and to those core values, the trust that we have. Lencioni does a great job of identifying both predictive and vulnerability-based trust, meaning that I can have trust that you're going to show up and do what it is that you're supposed to do in your role. But I also know that I have vulnerability-based trust with you, where you're going to respond graciously and give the benefit of doubt and have a positive bias towards me when I don't meet your expectations or when we disagree on something. Right. So you have the common values and the shared mission. You have that ultimately that common commitment to that's collective, right? Then you have that trust that's both predictive and vulnerability-based trust. Then you have just the way that we've agreed to communicate with one another, right? Like, we're going to communicate graciously and we're going to be respectful and we're going to keep a professional decorum as we come to the table. Then you have the opportunity for what I would call redemptive trust, and that redemptive trust, the redemptive conflict that allows us to engage in a healthy, productive, collaborative way. But if those other tiers are not in place, you're never going to get to redemptive conflict. You're always going to come at this from a place that I don't believe that you're for me, which means that I have to be for me and I have to now be in opposition to you and to your view so that I can win this argument. That's competitive conflict, and that's the default mode when those other layers are not in place.
What I love about where you're going with this, Nate, is introducing the idea that there is a positive version of conflict where we can work through this together, might invite people who are conflict averse. At all
Absolutely.
costs, I want to avoid
Exactly
this. The
right.
reality being that, boy, if we're just going to punt every time, we can't advance the ball far enough for us to be able to get together. So what would you say to those that would say, I avoid conflict at all costs? Perhaps their only experience has been
Yeah.
competitive conflict, where if we've got two people together, you give us enough time on the road, we're going to have conflict. I don't care who you are.
Yeah, and if you don't have conflict, you're not close enough, right? So the idea is when you get two things coming together, there's friction. So a lack of conflict just means there's a lack of connection. That's all that comes down to. And so, one of my favorite questions to ask is when somebody's conflict averse, my question is, when did you see conflict, either growing up or in your own personal lives, actually produce a positive outcome? And most people that are adverse to conflict grew up in an environment, or they've lived in an environment where all conflict comes, when that comes leads to a negative outcome. They
Yeah.
see relationships rifts, they see disconnects, they see cold wars happen where people just stop communicating, they see a
Yeah.
breakdown happen. And so the whole point is, why is it that I'm conflict averse? Maybe I'm just too sensitive, and so I need to work through my own insecurities, my lack of sensitivity. Maybe I don't have confidence that I have the ability to articulate my own view on something, so I shut down because of that. Maybe it's because I grew up in a traumatic environment where I saw it as so toxic that I don't want to take the chance of ending a relationship because of that. But I think the first question for me is always, what's driving your lack of willingness to engage in productive conflict? And then, as we've said before, you can't aspire to something that you don't have a vision for. Right. So I can't aspire to redemptive conflict if I don't have a vision for that being actually a thing. There's no category for that. So sometimes you got to create the category. Then you got to figure out what is the clutter that's getting in the way, and then allow people the opportunity to begin to develop the skills necessary to do it once they've been able to do the self-evaluative work necessary.
Man, that's
So
a
if we're
mouthful.
trying,
And I'm thinking through so many different situations in my own world. Personally, where I've walked in and have not shown up the way I wanted to. My son has gotten really good at, if he's reading me in a situation and I'm not showing up how he knows how I want to show up, but he's just reflective enough. And I mean, everybody in my family does it, but my son does it a little bit more frequently. And he'll just go, "Hey, Dad, are you reacting to this situation, or are you really responding to something else that happened today or this week?"
Absolutely.
And and there's been more than once where that's given me huge pause, where it's, what, I do think this situation, I think Bryce leaves the door to the basement open down at the beach house, just to piss me off. And so, sometimes I'll react poorly when he does it again. And so, those are comments that, when he asked me that I'm overreacting, he's like, "Are you really reacting to the situation?" Well, no, this situation doesn't warrant the response you just got. The fact that it's the 52nd time I've asked you to
yeah,
close that blankety blank door, is a different conversation. So,
I love that example, because to me, it's the prime example of one of the core issues when it comes to conflict. And that is the conflation, the confusion, the assumption that the same thing exists between methods and motives. Right. One of the biggest issues on the table is that I don't like how somebody's doing something. I don't like their methods, but then I assign a negative motive to it. And now I've created this narrative in my head of the reason why they're doing it, so that now when I come to the conversation, I'm not talking about methods anymore. I'm talking about their motives. And they're reacting negatively because that's not their motive. And I'm bringing a negative bias to this conversation. And now we're not talking even about how to collaborate to get to a better place. We're talking about the miscue of you assigning motives to me that I don't exist. And now I'm defensive. And now we can never actually get to the issue at hand.
yeah. I mean, to your point, if in coaching, we often see this as seeing the world through my eyes only. So Wayne says, "Close the door." Now, subtext: if you care about me, you'll comply here.
Yes.
yeah,
And the only reason he wouldn't comply is he
Absolutely.
doesn't respect me.
Yep.
He doesn't love me.
Yep.
So now when I ask you for the 52nd time, I'm like, dude, how do you not get this? This is the
Yes.
house I pay for.
Yes.
You can't close the door even?
Yeah.
The only reason I would do that is if I'm sending a negative, like I am declaring war. And poor Bryce just didn't close the door.
Sure.
Right? So
Sure.
like that's the yes and here, right?
Yeah.
Am I getting that about right? The
Yeah.
negative
No,
bias gets applied and
absolutely.
we're running before we get to that conversation. Not just you, Wayne.
Absolutely. And I think this is again, just using terminology here, perspective versus perception, right? My perception is the
Right.
negative bias and assigning of the motive, but I don't have good perspective. Perception is what I naturally have at my disposal because that's how I operate. Perspective is what I have to go work for. Perspective is I need to ask difficult questions. Perspective is I need to be able to allow other people to inform that, or I need to step back and evaluate my own insecurities or my own reactions to things to gain perspective. But it takes work to get to perspective. Perception is what I have naturally, and redemptive conflict requires both parties to regularly fight to move from perception to perspective. Because
So
if you
to
don't
get the
fight that, you'll
perspective,
never get there. Yeah.
you can't get there without a pause. You can't
Yeah.
get there without a pause and usually a pivot because
Yeah.
perspective isn't natural is what I'm hearing here.
Absolutely.
Organic is just run with what you see.
Absolutely.
And I'm seeing this and it's 11:30, so I wouldn't say it's our best version, Wayne.
And
By the
what's
time we get to
welling up
11:30,
inside of me.
right?
Yeah.
So, but to pause and go, okay, even assume and put on the best possible scenario here. Hey, I know you probably just forgot here, but handling it. So a Wayne handles it. A maybe doesn't, but it doesn't mean there wasn't conflict there.
Yeah.
Well, and the way I've gotten positive outcomes there a couple of times where I've simply said, "Hey, Bryce, you didn't close the door, and I'm not feeling very loved right now. I'm not feeling very respected right
There you
now."
go.
And then it's
Super zen Wayne moment where he's like,
but it's an
good on
I
you, man.
statement, right? It's like I feel this way when this happens, rather than this is why you're doing it, right? Like that's the whole point. But
And
go back.
we communicate that inside our family with, "Hey, let's make sure we're being inquisitive, not judgmental."
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
Let's ask questions. Hey, this happened, or you reacted this way. Why did that happen? Let's make sure we're asking questions, not presuming, not imprinting, not assuming our perception is correct.
I love that because that goes back to me, the shared mission for the family or the shared values that we have within our family, because there's a difference, I believe, between collaboration and cooperation. So cooperation is I have an agenda, you have an agenda, and we've figured out that if we work together, you can achieve your agenda better and I can achieve my agenda better. That's fine. Cooperation happens in lots of business environments, and sometimes in the marketplace, that's all we have to work with. But if you're going to work with a team that's going to excel, if you're going to try to have the best possible network of relationships and you're going to try to achieve great things together, you're going to have to go from cooperation to collaboration, which is I set aside my primary agenda. You set aside your primary agenda. We have a shared mission. We are unified in that mission. And now we are working together to bring about the best possible solutions. And we're going to come into conflict with one another because we disagree, but we're unified because we've set aside our own individual agendas to bring about a better long-term benefit for the organization, for the team in general.
So Nate, it sounds to me like if a family, if a business wants to bring redemptive conflict into their organization, the genesis of this, it sounds like, is we need to acknowledge that conflict is a thing and it doesn't
Absolutely.
always have to be bad, right? So is that kind of step one is, hey, there can be
Not-
a version of this where we can collaborate.
Not only is it normative, but if you don't have conflict, you're not having a team optimized because what's that? Yes. Yes, because you got a bunch of yes people, right? Like this idea of leaders don't want to just settle to get everybody to say yes to them around a table. They want to make sure that they're working with people that have a different vantage point, that have different perspectives, that are better at them in certain areas, and they're bringing that perspective to the table. So, and that's going to create conflict. It's going to create disagreement. And then from there, it's, hey, we appreciate this, we benefit from this. And so now we go figure out how to do this well so that people aren't wounded and we're not carrying residue from it. but we're actually working together towards something
Mhm.
really beneficial for the team, and each individual feels honored in the process.
We've
Yeah,
seen
and
this
I
in
think,
marriages too,
Yes.
sorry.
right? So in marriages, just quickly, Wayne, is
Yeah.
the thought that, oh, we never fight. I'm like, uh-oh. That means at least one person is rolling over, if not
Absolutely.
both. So there's conflict that's still there. There's agreements that's being made with that, what that conflict means, and it's not processed. So
Yeah.
I've seen couples that go from not fighting to the marriage is over.
Yes.
Mhm.
100%.
Right.
Well,
Right.
because the unstated sentiment was, we both don't want to feel uncomfortable. We're
Right.
both afraid of rejection. So we're going to allow our hearts to become guarded. Over time, we go from guarded to jaded. And at
Yeah.
that point, there's no longer a redemptive pathway for the relationship.
Can't come back from that. Yeah. Go ahead, Wayne. I cut you
Yeah.
off, brother.
No, I think that's really key, because we saw marriage vows change at some point, right? From as long as we both shall live to as long as we both shall love. And and suddenly there was an option that, hey, if I fall out of love, I fell in love with you, and if I fall out of love with you, then it's acceptable for the marriage to be over. Um, and I think that we've all seen couples that don't belong together, and the marriages end for any variety of
Sure.
reasons. But I think that we have lowered the bar in our society for giving, not training people that, hey, life is hard. There's going to be hardship. There's going to be conflict. It's got to be, but are we in this together? Are we collaborating for a common goal, or are we, cooperating with our own agendas? And, and we see this even with, if I'm counseling a couple and they're getting married, one of them may be better with money than the other one. They may need to provide some disciplines, but that doesn't mean keep all the accounts separate, right? Because the weak
Absolutely.
one's never going to learn unless that he or she puts himself in a context. Maybe it's considered a subservient. Hey, teach me, Obi-Wan, how to save money. I'm a spender, and May and I did this. When we were married, when we got married, she was put in charge of the checkbooks. Why? Because I didn't. I kept a check register, and I did what we do today on our check registers. When you're checking out somewhere, do you want to round up? I rounded up at least to the next dollar, usually to the next $2 or $3. When we got married, it was like $15,000 more in my checking account than I thought there was, because I always rounded up. But I had been doing that for years, and so and then when I changed banks, 15 years later at the corporate side, and there was $30,000 or $40,000 more in the bank account than I thought there was, because I never looked at the balances. I never checked it. I knew what the line items were, and I always rounded up. So May, meanwhile, couldn't live with that. Like, she knew to the penny how much was in that checking account at all times, and what checks were still out there, and what was going on. So there was no question. We were going to have massive conflict if we tried to do this together, but the accounts got merged, and she was put in charge. And then she taught me over time. And then ultimately I hired a bookkeeper, and the bookkeeper said, wait a minute, you've been running a $3 million a year business with a check register in your back pocket. Are you high? What is the
Yeah.
matter with you?
Yeah. With the wet finger accounting.
Yeah.
Wind's going south.
Yep. That's why
That's,
you're here. That's why you're here.
Nate,
But
one of the great challenges we see in coaching is there's conflict. It's there. We're not processing it, or worse, we're trying to process it via email or text. So if we're trying to work through redemptive, is there a program where we can have redemptive conflict via text or email? Is that even a thing?
Yeah, I've had this conversation many times with those within my own organizations, as well as with other executives. And some people really like everything written out. So we love email, we love texting, because then everything's written out. I'll be honest with you. If I need to engage in conflict first and foremost, and primarily through written out stuff, by definition, that means there's not enough trust. Because the very reason why I need it all written out is because I don't trust you to be for me and to be collaborating with me. So my take is, if 93% of communication, and that's the number, has nothing to do with the words that are coming out of my mouth, then by definition, email and texting gives you 7% opportunity to effectively manage conflict.
Wait, does it go to
7%.
8% if we use emojis? Does that
Exactly,
help?
exactly,
Does
exactly.
that
Right.
not count?
So can we
Uh-oh.
let's just have an objective perspective on that. Yes, I understand, but I understand why we do it.
Right.
Sometimes it's expedient. Sometimes it keeps us from having to be in the same space together because we don't have the opportunity to do that. But most often it's a lack of trust, or we're just not willing to value the other person enough to show up and be present with the other individual. And my take is that if I'm going to have a difficult conversation and I want you to understand where my heart is on this, I want you to know that I value you, that I'm for you, and that we have a shared mission and common values in how we do this. You got to be together, at least on the phone via voice,
Yep.
ideally across a screen potentially, but
Yeah.
ultimately, optimally sitting in the same space, because there is an energy that we give off. I'm not trying to be mystical with that. We just give off an energy, right? And if I can walk into a space and I can show up in a way where they can feel what it's like to be on the other side of me, and I'm looking for a redemptive path forward, that changes things. But the problem is we so often develop a narrative in our head. And let's go here. One of my favorite genre of television shows is legal television shows. And we see legal battles and we love watching the gotcha moments. We love seeing that argumentation. I'm huge on I love watching the persuasive case that's being made. That's a competitive conflict. And the bottom
Mhm.
line is we're looking for what delineates us versus what unifies us. We're looking for weaknesses in an individual argument. We're looking for fallacies in the way that they're presenting. We're exploiting those differences. We have a negative bias with that individual. We're focused on being right and getting the win rather than what is common between us. Where are our shared interests? How do we establish that common bond and that common ground and have a positive bias, and then we'll delineate as necessary so that we can actually understand the other perspective that the person is coming to the table with.
Things tend to escalate very quickly when it's over text or email, right? Because of what you're describing there is that I will misinterpret. I'm probably going to, if you were to say, "Oh, I hear you," hearing your tone, seeing your face, that can make sense. I hear you. If it's all caps, for example, we missed, right?
Yes.
And they're going to interpret that very, very poorly. So one of the things that we'll try to do in coaching is A, apply a positive bias. B, if it's a difficult conversation, eyeball to eyeball. I mean, we
Yep.
need
100%.
stop. No more text, no more email. We've got to have a conversation. Best is in person. Second best, let's at least do a FaceTime or something where I can see you via video chat.
Yep.
And that doesn't guarantee things can still escalate there, right? If
Absolutely.
I'm not showing up right. But if I was curious, Nate, and I am, right, but I was trying to coach a company that wants to bring some of this redemptive conflict and make that more our culture here. Step one, where do they start, Nate? Where do we begin as a family or as a business?
Well, I think again, my biggest thing is if you don't have a shared mission and common values that you've collectively agreed to, none of this can work. Because that if you can reestablish that and then you say, okay, now here's how we're going to choose to engage in disagreement. We're going to normalize and actually celebrate disagreement. We're going to learn how to have healthy professional decorum in the way that we engage in these things. And then we're going to invite those disagreements into the milieu so that we can now work out those differences and figure out how to collaborate together. But again, so many organizations have a very nebulous idea of their mission. They don't have a clarity on their values. They may even have them up on the walls everywhere, but in meetings, everybody knows that that's not how we operate. That's not the culture that's here. And so therefore you just get muted interactions because people will just say, yep. Then they'll buy in quickly. And then when resistance comes or implementation is attempted, you don't get the buy-in because they weren't willing to be honest because there wasn't enough trust to have the real conversation that you needed to have. And so if you're trying to build a culture of trust, you're trying to establish what is it that we've agreed to? What is it that we're going to work together to actually try to achieve together? How do you fit into that? Do the people feel valued? Does their perspective matter to those individuals. If I'm coming as the organizational leader with all of the pieces of the puzzle, and I hired you not because I think you've got pieces to the puzzle, but because I just want you to say yes and affirm as I present it to you, then you're going to eventually decide that you don't have a voice in this, and typically you're going to end up finding another organization anyway, because I don't feel like my voice matters. I don't feel like I offer anything to the organization, and there's a diminishing of just a sense of value and ultimately just dignity.
Yeah, I think Nate, what's going through my head is I'm the driver. I'm the hammer. I'm the 8 on the Enneagram. I'm the the high D on the disc. I'm just the let's run through.
You're not conflict averse.
No, I'm not. Well, I'm not. You're absolutely right. I'm not conflict averse, but I also am super pragmatic in that here's what win looks like. I really like if we're running a 400-meter race and the finish line is right back here. Do we have to actually run the 400 meters, or can I just step off, walk around the finish line, and walk through the end? Like let's take the shortcut. Like if I'm running a 200-meter race, can I just run across the infield to get to the finish line? Like I'm pragmatic on that front, and so my tendency is to what's the shortest distance between two lines, and I don't understand why you're not willing to take this this direction with me. Now I don't take that with I don't take that approach, let's say, with the compliance guys, because I have to, that's an area where I kind of step back and go, hey, this is what win looks like. I need you guys to tell me how we get there. And I'm not going to interfere too much. You're just going to give me the guidelines. But what I've learned with my teams is that, I also need an integrator. And I need to come in and throw the big idea on the table and then frequently leave the room. Like literally just leave the room and let the other people talk, because I'll bring too much personality. I'll bring too much loudness. There will be people in the room who have amazing contributions who they just wilt because they're sitting next to me. Mm-hmm. And it's not, they're amazing for the team. I need them on the team. I need them bringing their A game to the team, but they can't do it with me in the room. And so, it's empowering our teams and allowing that conflict, but also, as the high driver, as the high visionary, I've got to empower my integrator. I've got to empower my merchants. I've got to, to make the decisions, to have the conversations, and then ultimately bring back and say, hey, we didn't get you 100% of what you wanted, but we got you 93% there. We got you 94% there. Here's why you can't have the other 6 or 7%. Yeah. And there's got to be a trust. And now I've got a unicorn on my team too. And shout out to Mark Powers, because we got an email this past week from a client. Hey, my account's sitting too high in cash. I know I touched that account a month ago. I know, I made instruction, and so my email the client, I'm so sorry this happened. We'll correct it, copy Mark on it. Mark comes back to me and says, hey, Wayne, it's not that account that's high. That guy's got $3 million with us. This is 2% of the 3 million, and our threshold is 2%. So it's not one account that's sitting that high in cash. It's his whole portfolio that's sitting that high in cash. And those trades that you instructed were sent and did trade a month ago. The money's invested. He's just looking at the screen a different way. Now, that client's very patient, and I can go back and walk things back with him because he's such an amazing guy. I hope he's listening to this. Mark comes back to me, and get with the explanation, and I have to go back to Mark and go, I didn't assume positive bias, and I didn't. And Mark's response to me is, hey, I checked my ego at the door when before I got my coffee. We're good. Let's just keep going.
Yep.
But that's an example of where if I come on at 300 degrees, I end up torching the people around me. If I don't have, with Mark, I've got 16 years of accumulated trust. If I did that to Mark the first 2 years, 5 years that he was with me,
yeah,
he would have become the guy he is today, because I'd have torched him. He'd be like singed plastic by now, calloused and amorphous and jaded. So.
there's pieces of this that I think are important when you're talking about the language that we use around redemptive conflict, the environment that we create around redemptive conflict, and really what the priorities are. I loved your comment earlier about your family, right? It's like, are we coming to the table with a genuine sense of curiosity? And because I think one of the greatest differences between redemptive versus competitive conflict is really that genuine sense of curiosity. Am I
Mhm.
already assuming certain things, and am I imposing that on another person, or am I inviting that person out of a genuine sense of curiosity to give me their perspective? There's a difference between questioning somebody and asking questions of somebody, right? Like those are two very different things, and yet it feels the same, or it can look the same, except that the motive is very different, and the posture is very different. Especially, my belief is that the one of the greatest things I can do in any conflict, professional or personal, is if I'm telling myself that this person is for me, that changes the entire complexion of what's happening. But
Mhm.
because what we do is we assume that this person's a threat, we assume that this person's not for me, and then things get ratcheted up. If I'm internalizing saying, no, this person is for me, now how do we work through this together? And if two people are doing that, you're going to figure it out. And your tone is going to be different, your posture is going to be different, and the language that you use is going to be different. But there is a skill base to this, right? Like you've got to develop the skills to have productive conflict. And so many people engage in conflict the way that they always have, that they were taught how to do when they were teenagers. A lot of people, it's been said, well, that most of us still do conflict the way we were taught how to do it when we were 12. Well, it's
Mhm.
like of all of the areas of life that we need to develop skills in, I would say redemptive conflict might be one of the best,
Right.
because you're just going to naturally have that in life if you're going to have any meaningful relationships in your life. And so the ability for me to offer my perception without blaming or judging the other person, the willingness to listen attentively with my eyes, my ears, and my heart to really understand what's going on, and maybe sometimes fight through the bluster and see through kind of the hyped up way in which they might be communicating to me, looking for those moments where I feel discomfort and I'm curious, why do I feel this way? Why am I reacting this way to what this person is offering me? To prioritize creating a safe, supportive environment. And that's where I think, from a leadership perspective, we have to cultivate that environment if we're going to allow people to have disagreement and do it productively. And then I think at the end of the day, the both and thinking versus the either or thinking, or the ability to say, look at somebody and say, and this perspective, rather than no, it's this one, it's an either or thing. I think the idea that we can have competing views and actually they can coexist, at least in the short term. Maybe they
Mhm.
can't coexist when we have to make a decision, but for the short term, they can coexist as we're trying to figure out what's the best path forward. But if it's either or, then one of them gets eliminated, and immediately you've lost a part of the redemptive process that you're trying to work through. And so I think those are skills that we have to develop. My ability to self-regulate in the moment, so I'm not overreacting when I feel myself frustrated or feeling unheard or disrespected or devalued in that situation. And then being in a place where I can come to them with a posture that says, I want to figure this out with you, and I value you enough to work together to come up with the best possible outcome.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things echoing the back of my head is it's amazing what we can accomplish if we don't care who gets the
It's
credit.
great. Absolutely.
That is, I mean, we live in such an arrogant, self-consumed world where we're jealous and of people who we see on social media that have things or going places that we want to go. Where we're comparing our worst day to their best day and finding ourselves wanting. And we can do that with every single person in our sphere. You can look at some aspect of their life and it's better than mine in this area, and and we can just live our lives like Eeyore. Like everything is terrible. The sun is behind clouds and it's raining every single day.
Absolutely.
Um, and then we can, when we bring that to work and we're working on something, it can be, hey, I want my idea to win. So I'm fighting for my idea. I'm not, and I'm fighting for the win of my idea, not because my idea is actually the best, but because I want to win. And when I don't, when I'm forcing my opinion, when I'm forcing my idea simply because I want to win, I am not, I'm not caring about who gets the credit. I am absolutely caring about who gets the credit. I
Absolutely.
absolutely want my initials on this thing at
Yeah.
the end of the day. And that's where I think we've got to be able to engage conflict. We've got to be responsible with it. We've got to pursue redemption in it, and be able to agree disagreeably, and find the win for the team, not just for us
Yeah.
individually. And that is, I mean, it hits in every area of life. But I think in terms of what I've gone through my own journey in visionary wealth management. It was me and Wendy for a few years, and then it was me, Wendy, and Mark for a very long time. And then in the last 3 years, we've gone from me, Wendy, and Mark to me, Wendy, Mark, plus 5 or 6 other people, and with a vision to go more than that.
Mm-hmm.
And my life is better. There's less stress. Our clients are better served. The outcomes for our clients are better because we've added more people to do the work.
And yet there's exponentially greater potential for conflict.
Absolutely. 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 Exponentially more misunderstandings, exponentially more opportunities for conflict. Every single person you add, you exponentially increase the number of connect points, and therefore you exponentially increase the number of potential points of conflict or sparks flying.
Absolutely.
And so, that's where coaching comes in. That's where counseling comes in. That's where personality tests come in, and studying those personality tests to understand one another, and learning to bear one another, and bear with one another, and being able to, check ego at the door is the biggest thing. And having every person in the organization able to come in, for me personally, having them able to step into my room, my office, and say, hey, I need a minute. And then be able to articulate, here's what you said, or here's what I think you said, here's how it landed.
Yeah.
Or here's what I heard, that may or may not be different from what you said. Here's what I think you meant. But when we can create an environment where we can actually articulate that. But man, Nate, that's not how most of us were raised, right? That's not how we were raised. When I want your opinion, I'll give it to you.
Mm-hmm.
When that's not how leadership was done in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. Suddenly, people want to pick on millennials and Gen Z and don't know how to work. I think I know millennials and Gen Zs that work harder than I ever worked. Yeah. And are more mission driven and more vision driven, and have a bigger view for the impact they want to have in the world. I look at people who were talking earlier, before we got on, we hit record, on the issue of identity. And I see people who want to see the world be a better place, see the world be a more accepting place, be a more fair place, be a more equitable place. And, they're willing to work. They're willing to adjust their shopping habits. They're willing to eat vegan or vegetarian or something else, but because their identity is in a world that's better than it is today. Yeah. Those are values that we weren't trained in growing up. Absolutely. It was, it was the best meal of our week was if we got to go to Roy Rogers and get three hamburgers for $1 on Sundays, man.
Sure. Sure. Well, and I think we allow our identities to be so closely tied to our performance, to our ideas, to the things that we can perform or produce. And if our identity is not separate from that, we end up allowing our identity to be so closely tied to our ideas that then when you're in disagreement with me, I'm personalizing that conflict because you are disagreeing with my identity versus my identity is secure. I know who I am. I know what I bring to the table. Now here's an idea. What do you think of that? And it becomes this ball that gets put out on the table that we get to all play and interact with, rather than something that I've given birth to that's now a part of my identity that now you're rejecting when you disagree with me. And I think we've got to figure out how to fight through that clutter. I love Covey's new book, Trust and Inspire. where he's contrasting what leadership used to look like in the impositional view of leadership versus what leadership is now, which is to trust other people and to inspire them. And as a result, the opportunity now to bring about better outcomes because of the collaboration that happens in a trusted and inspired environment versus what used to happen as a result of just that top-down style of leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think so the top-down level of style of leadership works for small organizations, for small impact. I'll pick on my dentist a little bit. I hope he doesn't listen to this. So his dad started a practice. He and his brother are both dentists, and they're in their late 50s or 60s at this stage. When I go to the dentist, he actually cleans my teeth. He actually does the x-rays. He actually touches my mouth. He's the only one who touches my mouth. That is very, very different than most dental practices.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It is also absolutely not scalable.
I was just thinking that. Absolutely.
And there is zero opportunity for advancement for anyone on his staff.
Yeah.
There are 2 people who work in that office. There are only 2 people who work in that office. When one of them leaves, he has a 50% vacancy rate in his staff. And they are the only 2 people who have been there the entire time. I think one of the people actually passed away at this stage, retired and then passed away shortly thereafter. They replaced her, and they replaced her with someone who actually knew how to use a computer. So that's been a light year step, and that just happened within the last couple of years. So it's an older practice, but I enjoy that. But my point is that's so not scalable. Yeah. Right. I mean, that is the equivalent of somebody saying, hey, we're going to sell cheeseburgers. And in order to make, I'm going to go out back and hack the leg off a cow so I can make the hamburger so I can make your sandwich. I'm going to need a few minutes.
Absolutely.
Right. And so it's, if we're going to scale anything, if we're going to be able to reach more, and it's not reaching for more for the sake of reaching for more. It's reaching more because we believe what we're offering is positive and good for the world.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
If you truly do believe in a product or service you're delivering, then to be a good steward of it, it means deliver it to more people.
Yes.
Now, what we do at Visionary Wealth Management, I can't do it for 9 billion people on the planet. Right. But for the right clients, we want to do it for more clients next year than we're doing it for this year.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's got to be measured growth, and it's got to be scalable.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But we've got to do that. All of that starts and ends with our ability to engage positively in conflict. And redemptive conflict should be where we both walk away respected, feeling honored in this, feeling affirmed. Not affirmed for stupidity. Like if you come into the conversation and say 2 and 2 is 3, I'm not affirming the factuality or accuracy of your belief system.
Absolutely.
Right? There's got to be a come to Jesus conversation here. But I can validate you as a person. I can respect you as a person. We can we can disagree agreeably.
Absolutely.
And then the redemption spot is where it's all coming together in the context of we're moving the mission forward. We're moving the purpose forward. The family is better served and more unified tomorrow than it was today because of this interaction.
Absolutely.
The team is stronger. Clients are better served.
Yes.
Because of this conflict. And the positive comes out. So
anything
else you add as the last couple thoughts?
No, the last couple of thoughts would be psychological safety is kind of the underlying piece that we never got to. And that is that it's that felt permission for me to be honest, forthcoming, vulnerable, be imperfect. And when I feel that, and then I'm in an environment where I feel seen, heard, and understood, then I can bring not my true self. This is for a different podcast. It's not about my true self, which is the common vernacular of the day, the common rhetoric. It's about my best self, that I can bring my best self to the table. And now we can collaborate to figure out how to approach things and navigate the disagreements to bring about the best possible benefits for the organization. So that psychological safety has to be layered there. Then you build those mission and those values on that. And then you work your way through all of that. And then I think at the end of the day, a team that's functioning in that kind of a culture, they're going to figure stuff out. They're going to be able to come up with good plans. If you got the right people on your team and a culture that's conducive to redemptive conflict, man, I'll put money on that team any day of the week. And I get excited about that. And then people don't have to be afraid of conflict. They can see it as a beneficial part of the overall achievement and maximization of that team.
That's great, Nate. That's good stuff. Thank you so much for being with us, Nate Wagner, president of Actuator Leadership Group. Thank you in absentia, Trent Booth, for being here for another episode of the Envizion More Podcast.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the time.
Thank you for listening to the Envizion More Podcast with Wayne Wagner Jr. of Visionary Wealth Management. We hope you were encouraged and inspired by the conversation today. If you want to dig deeper into the show notes or Wayne's work at Visionary, you can find us at envisionmore.com. That's Envision with a Z. Advisory services are provided through Wealth Plan Investment Management. Wealth Plan Investment Management and Visionary Wealth Management are separate entities. The content is developed from sources believed to be providing accurate information. The information in this material is not intended as tax or legal advice. Please consult legal or tax professionals for specific information regarding your individual situation. The opinions and material provided are for general information and should not be considered a solicitation for the purchase or sale of any security. Thanks for listening.